They gave me 72 hours to paint my house beige or face foreclosure. 3 people in cheap suits stood on my doorstep, claiming my blue shutters violated community standards that didn't exist. The woman leading them waved fake legal documents, while her accomplices blocked my driveway with their idling sedan, exhaust fumes mixing with Virginia summer heat. I'm Damon Williams, retired Army Ranger, 18 years special operations across 3 continents. I'd been quietly renovating my inherited Victorian home in Millbrook Heights for 6 months, but as I stared at their obviously forged compliance notice, every instinct I'd developed tracking insurgents started firing warnings. The paper still reeked of fresh toner. The badges looked like toy store rejects, and this woman's hands were shaking like autumn leaves. They picked the wrong house. They had no idea what kind of storm they'd just walked into. Have you ever dealt with fake HOA scammers? Drop a comment about your worst neighbor story and let me know where you're watching from. Trust me, this gets wild. Let me rewind and explain how this nightmare began. My name's Damon Williams, 43 years old, retired Army Ranger with 18 years of special operations experience. A roadside bomb in Syria left me with some scars and a medical discharge, but my mind stayed razor sharp. 6 months ago, I inherited my grandmother's beautiful Victorian house in Millbrook Heights, Virginia, population 4,200, where everybody pretends to know everybody's business. I'd moved there seeking peace after nearly 2 decades hunting dangerous people in places most Americans couldn't find on a map. I craved quiet mornings with coffee on the wraparound porch, the satisfaction of restoration work, and neighbors who respected boundaries. My calloused hands had traded rifle grips for power tools, and I was content with that exchange. Grandmother May's house needed love. The wraparound porch sagged in places, the kitchen hadn't seen updates since the Nixon administration, and the bathroom belonged in a museum of horrors. But it was mine, paid in full with clear title and no mortgage. I had my VA disability, my savings, and time to restore it to its former glory. That's when Patricia Steinberg entered my life like a recurring nightmare. Picture a 54-year-old woman who'd relocated from Northern Virginia and immediately declared herself the neighborhood's cultural guardian. She drove a silver Lexus she parked like she owned the street, always wore navy blazers that screamed corporate authority, and carried a designer briefcase stuffed with complaint forms she'd designed herself. The woman had the warmth of a parking enforcement officer and twice the entitlement. But here's what made Patricia different from your average busybody. Within my first week of renovations, I noticed something that made my military training kick into high alert. She'd drive by my house multiple times per day, always slowing down when she passed, always staring with the intensity of someone conducting surveillance. When I painted my front door navy blue to match the original 1890s color scheme, she was there within hours with her first violation notice. Week 1 brought my introduction to Patricia's twisted universe. Apparently, painting my door navy blue instead of approved neutral colors constituted unauthorized exterior modifications. The notice demanded a $750 fine and threatened escalated enforcement if I didn't comply within 48 hours. The paper smelled like cheap printer ink and desperation. But wait, here's where it gets interesting. As I read through her demands, I noticed something that would change everything. Patricia had written the violation for failure to maintain community standards as outlined in Section 4.3 of Neighborhood Covenants. Problem was, I'd done extensive research when I inherited the house. There were no recorded covenants on my street, no HOA fees, no association authority, absolutely nothing. Week 2 escalated beautifully. My grass measured 3.1 inches tall. The supposed community standard was 3 inches maximum. Another $750 fine. Thank you very much. I measured my lawn with a ruler just to confirm I wasn't losing my sanity. Spoiler alert, Patricia was running a complete con game. By week 3, she'd graduated to claiming my Ford F-150 violated commercial vehicle restrictions. It's a standard pickup truck, the kind half of Virginia drives to work every morning. But in Patricia's manufactured reality, anything that didn't fit her suburban fantasy was grounds for financial penalties. Here's where the racial undertones started becoming impossible to ignore. Mrs. Rodriguez, my elderly neighbor who made tamales that could end international conflicts, pulled me aside during week 4. "Damon," she whispered, glancing around nervously. "That woman's been targeting the non-white families specifically. The Chens paid her $2,000 to avoid harassment about their garden design. The Jackson family on Maple Street gave her $2,500 just to stop her complaints about their kid's basketball hoop." Mrs. Rodriguez's weathered hands trembled as she spoke. This wasn't random harassment. Patricia was systematically targeting families she viewed as not belonging in her neighborhood, using fake authority and legal-sounding threats to extract money from people who looked different than her suburban ideal. Carl, our mail carrier, confirmed my growing suspicions when he stopped by during week 5. "Never delivered any legitimate HOA documents to this route, Damon," he said, adjusting his postal uniform. "Been walking these streets for 14 years. If there was a real homeowners association, the Postal Service would know about it." That's when I realized Patricia Steinberg had made a critical tactical error. She decided to run her scam on someone who'd spent 18 years dealing with people who thought rules didn't apply to them. She was about to discover the difference between real authority and playground intimidation. 3 days after my conversation with Carl, Patricia returned with what she probably thought was overwhelming force. I was installing new porch railings when I heard multiple car doors slamming in my driveway. The sound of gravel crunching under several pairs of feet told me this wasn't a social visit. Through the window, I watched Patricia emerge from her Lexus wearing her most authoritative navy blazer, followed by 2 men I'd never seen before. The first looked like her brother-in-law Kevin, mid-40s, soft in the middle, wearing a rumpled polo shirt that screamed middle management desperation. The second was his buddy Steve, a nervous guy who kept checking his phone like he expected the authorities to call any moment. Both carried clipboards and wore plastic badges that looked like they'd come from a Halloween costume clearance sale. The summer air carried Patricia's overwhelming perfume, something floral that probably cost more than most people's monthly groceries, mixed with the exhaust from Kevin's idling Honda. She approached my door with the swagger of someone serving an eviction notice. "Mr. Williams," she announced when I opened up, "I'm here with the HOA Enforcement Committee. Your property is now under emergency compliance review due to persistent violations and failure to respect community standards." Kevin stepped forward, puffing out his chest like a bantam rooster. "Sir, we require immediate payment of $3,500 as a compliance deposit, or we'll be forced to initiate property lien procedures within 72 hours. I leaned against my doorframe, keeping my voice steady. In Afghanistan, I'd learned that staying calm under pressure made enemies reveal their weaknesses faster than any interrogation manual. Property line procedures. That sounds very official. Which court issued the authorization? Steve fumbled through his clipboard, sweat appearing on his forehead despite the air conditioning from my open door. The papers rustled like nervous energy as his hands shook. Well, it's not exactly a court order, technically speaking, but rather a community enforcement action authorized under the Neighborhood Association bylaws. Which bylaws specifically? I interrupted. I'd like to see the recorded covenants for this area. Patricia's face flushed red as a stop sign. Don't you question legitimate authority. We have full legal standing to enforce community standards, and your continued violations are destroying property values for every decent family in this neighborhood. But here's where Patricia made her first major mistake. She added with a sneer that revealed her true motivations. This neighborhood has maintained certain standards for generations. We can't have people moving in and changing the character of our community. The racial dog whistle was about as subtle as a fire alarm. That's when I decided to have some educational fun. My old Army buddy Michael had become a civil rights attorney after his service, and during our last conversation, he'd explained exactly how property discrimination works. Time to put that knowledge to practical use. Ma'am, I spent 18 years following legitimate authority in some of the world's most dangerous places. I understand how real authority operates. I stepped closer, my voice dropping to the tone I'd used questioning captured terrorists. Which section of Virginia state law requires pre-1900 homes to have beige exterior paint? Silence thick enough to cut with a knife. Kevin and Steve exchanged glances like middle schoolers caught cheating on a test. The smell of their nervous perspiration mixed with Patricia's perfume created an almost comical combination. "I'm not here to debate technicalities," Patricia snapped. "Either you pay the compliance fees now, or we file the liens tomorrow morning." "With what authority?" I asked, pulling out my phone. "And folks, I hope you don't mind me recording this conversation for my legal records." The effect was immediate and beautiful. Steve took 3 steps backward, nearly stumbling over his own feet. Kevin's clipboard started trembling in his hands like a leaf in a hurricane. But Patricia doubled down with the desperation of someone whose entire operation was crumbling. "You can't record us without permission. That's illegal wiretapping." I smiled the same smile I'd worn when cornering insurgents who thought they were smarter than American special forces. "Actually, ma'am, Virginia is a one-party consent state. I can record any conversation I'm participating in. After they fled, trailing empty threats and muttered complaints, I got to work. Military intelligence training doesn't just evaporate because you change careers. I photographed their license plates, researched the registrations, and discovered something fascinating. Kevin worked at PrintMax Copy Center on Commerce Street, the same place where all their official documents had that distinctive fresh toner smell. But the real bombshell came when Carl stopped by during his next mail delivery. Damon, I did some investigating like you requested. Turns out Kevin's been using the copy center after hours for the past 8 months, paying cash for everything. Manager doesn't know he's been coming in evenings. Mrs. Rodriguez's revelation over morning coffee was even more damaging. Her kitchen smelled like cinnamon and old wood, but her information was pure gold. That horrible woman tried the same thing on 5 other houses, all minority families. The Nguyens were so terrified they moved away last month. But here's the crucial detail, Damon. I witnessed her collecting money from Mr. Chen, and she put it directly into her purse. No receipt, no official paperwork, just cash into her pocket. But here's where the story takes a turn that'll make your blood boil, Mrs. Rodriguez continued. She told the Chen family that certain types of people need to follow stricter rules to maintain neighborhood standards, said their traditional garden was lowering property values for real Americans. That's when I realized Patricia Steinberg had made the classic mistake every criminal I'd ever tracked eventually made. She'd gotten greedy, sloppy, and revealed her true motivations. This wasn't just fraud. This was racially motivated harassment designed to force minority families out of the neighborhood. 2 weeks later, Patricia decided to escalate to what she considered heavy artillery. I was installing new kitchen cabinets when I heard commotion outside that made my blood pressure spike. Not because I was worried, but because I recognized the sound of someone impersonating law enforcement very badly. Through my window, I watched a police cruiser pull up behind Patricia's Lexus. Except everything was wrong about that patrol car. The paint looked fresh but cheap, the light bar was mounted crooked, and the officer who climbed out moved like he'd never worn a uniform in his life. When he turned around, I nearly burst out laughing. It was Kevin stuffed into what appeared to be a discount Halloween version of a police uniform. The polyester fabric strained against his expanding waistline, his badge was pinned on sideways, and his shoes were brown Oxfords instead of regulation black boots. Any real cop would rather resign than commit that uniform violation. Patricia marched to my door with Kevin trailing behind like an overgrown security guard. She brandished an official-looking document that reeked of fresh printer ink mixed with pure desperation. "Mr. Williams, this is Officer Patterson from the County Sheriff's Department. We have a court order for your immediate compliance with community standards." Kevin straightened his fake uniform and attempted to deepen his voice. "Sir, you need to bring your property into compliance within 24 hours or face arrest for contempt of court." I opened my door wider and studied them both. In Iraq, I'd learned to identify fake documents and imposters from considerable distance. These two weren't even close to convincing. "Officer Patterson, could I see your badge number and department identification?" Kevin's face went pale beneath his discount aviator sunglasses. "Well, that's not really standard procedure since we have the court order and—" "Actually, every law enforcement officer in Virginia carries mandatory identification," I said, pulling out my phone. "Mind if I verify your employment with the Sheriff's Department?" The silence stretched like a guitar string about to snap. Kevin's fake uniform was already showing massive sweat stains, and Patricia's left eye had developed a nervous twitch that would have been hilarious if it weren't so pathetic. That evening, Patricia pulled her next strategic move. She'd reserved the community room at the Millbrook Heights Library and invited neighbors for what she called a community safety hearing. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as about 180 residents filed into folding chairs, most looking confused about why they were there. I arrived strategically late, just as Patricia was explaining how my refusal to comply with basic community standards was threatening everyone's property values and neighborhood safety. She'd established a makeshift podium and wore her most official-looking blazer, the one that made her look like a funeral director with authority complexes. "This individual has repeatedly violated our established neighborhood covenants," she announced, pointing at me like I'd personally insulted her ancestry. "He refuses to maintain proper exterior aesthetics, operates unauthorized construction without permits, and parks commercial vehicles in residential zones." But here's where Patricia revealed her true motivations to the entire room. She continued, "This neighborhood has maintained certain demographic standards for decades. We cannot allow certain elements to move in and destroy the community character we've worked so hard to preserve. I raised my hand politely. Ma'am, could you show us these neighborhood covenants? I'd appreciate seeing the recorded documents. Her face flushed red as a fire engine. These matters don't require... Actually, they absolutely do. I stood up, my voice carrying the authority I'd learned commanding soldiers in combat situations. Virginia law requires all homeowner association rules to be recorded with property deeds. I checked with the county clerk yesterday. No covenants exist for our neighborhood. Old Mr. Chen, who'd paid Patricia $2,000 for garden violations, suddenly looked like someone who'd been slapped awake. You mean I didn't have to pay those fines? That's when the dam completely burst. Mrs. Nguyen stood up, her voice shaking with anger. She made us pay $2,200 for our mailbox color. Said it didn't fit neighborhood aesthetics. Young Maria Santos from Oak Street chimed in. $800 for having the wrong style fence. She said certain decorative choices weren't appropriate for our community type. The room erupted in angry voices as neighbors realized they'd been systematically robbed by a woman in a designer blazer running a racially motivated extortion scheme. But Patricia wasn't finished yet. She tried to restore order by bringing Kevin back into the room, still wearing his ridiculous fake uniform. Officer Patterson will explain the legal consequences of ignoring community standards, she announced desperately. I smiled and pulled out my phone. Actually, I contacted the real sheriff's department this afternoon. Deputy Johnson is en route to meet Officer Patterson. Should be very educational. Kevin's face went white as hospital linens. He mumbled something about a family emergency and practically sprinted for the exit, his fake badge rattling like loose change as he fled. 5 minutes later, real Deputy Johnson walked through the door, a seasoned professional with a crisp uniform and genuine authority radiating from every step. He took one look around the room, then at me, and nodded. Mr. Williams, you're the Army Ranger who reported the impersonation incident. The taste of victory was sweeter than Mrs. Rodriguez's homemade flan. After her public humiliation at the library, Patricia went completely nuclear. The woman had clearly never learned the first rule of warfare. When you're losing, don't escalate to tactics that guarantee your destruction. But that's exactly what she did. 3 days later, I was welding a new garden gate when Deputy Johnson appeared at my door, looking professionally uncomfortable. The smell of hot metal and welding fumes mixed with his cologne as he approached, his boots crunching on the gravel driveway. Damon, I hate to bother you, but we received a complaint requiring investigation. He pulled out his notepad, clearly not enjoying this conversation. Patricia Steinberg filed a report claiming you made racially motivated threats against her. She's requesting a restraining order and suggesting you're unstable. I set down my welding equipment and removed my mask, the cool evening air hitting my sweaty face. What exactly am I supposed to have threatened? She claims you used your military background to intimidate her, made references to hunting people like her, and implied you had specialized combat training that made you dangerous to white families in the community. Johnson looked embarrassed reading the accusations. Look, Damon, I served 3 tours in Afghanistan myself. I know the difference between a threat and a statement of fact, but I have to investigate every formal complaint. Wait until you hear what happened next. This is where Patricia's desperation led her to make the mistake that would destroy everything she'd built. That afternoon, I found myself in Judge Margaret Coleman's courtroom watching Patricia perform what could only be described as Academy Award-level theatrical nonsense. She dressed entirely in black like she was attending a state funeral, complete with tissues that she dabbed at her completely dry eyes for dramatic effect. Your Honor, she sobbed into the microphone, this man is clearly suffering from combat-related mental instability combined with racial resentment. He bragged about hunting insurgents and implied he viewed people like me as enemy targets. I fear for my safety and the safety of every decent family in our community. Judge Coleman had presided over cases for 26 years and had witnessed every variety of performance art masquerading as legal testimony. She looked at Patricia with the expression of someone who'd discovered something unpleasant on her shoe. Ms. Steinberg, do you have any evidence supporting these allegations? Recordings, witnesses, written communications? Patricia's hands fluttered like nervous birds. Well, not exactly physical evidence per se, but the implied threats were very clear to anyone who understood military terminology and racial dynamics. I'll interpret that as no, Judge Coleman interrupted. Mr. Williams, would you like to respond to these allegations? I stood up, keeping my voice calm and respectful. During my 18 years of service, I testified in numerous military tribunals and learned that judges appreciate brevity and facts over drama. Your Honor, I've never threatened Ms. Steinberg or anyone else. I did inform her that I was familiar with legitimate authority, having served under it for 18 years. I also mentioned that I understood the difference between real law enforcement and people playing dress-up games. I pulled out my phone and played the recording from our library encounter. Patricia's voice filled the courtroom as she tried to silence angry neighbors, followed by Kevin's panicked exit when I mentioned the real deputy's imminent arrival. Judge Coleman listened to the entire recording, her eyebrows climbing higher with each ridiculous exchange. When it finished, she looked at Patricia like she'd found a snake in her garden. Ms. Steinberg, this recording indicates that you've been collecting money from residents under false pretenses and using someone to impersonate a law enforcement officer. Are you aware that both activities constitute serious felony offenses in Virginia? The courtroom was so quiet you could hear Patricia's nervous breathing echoing off the walls. Her tissues had stopped their dramatic dabbing, and her face had gone the color of old parchment. Your Honor, I was simply trying to maintain community standards, and your restraining order request is denied, Judge Coleman interrupted. Furthermore, I'm forwarding a copy of this recording to the District Attorney's Office for criminal review. Mr. Williams, thank you for your service, and I apologize for wasting your time with this frivolous complaint. But Patricia's desperation led to her biggest tactical error yet. While I was in court defending myself against her fantasy accusations, she'd recruited 2 new accomplices who looked like they'd been hired from the criminals for rent classified section. They appeared at my house claiming to be property assessors while I was away, asking Mrs. Rodriguez detailed questions about my renovation work and attempting to peer through my windows. What they didn't realize was that my grandmother, paranoid but wise woman that she was, had installed a military-grade security system that would make Pentagon security jealous. Every angle of my property was monitored by cameras recording in high definition, complete with audio and night vision capabilities. When I reviewed the footage that evening, watching these amateurs case my house while discussing which violations to fabricate as evidence, I realized Patricia had just handed me the smoking gun I needed. She'd crossed the line from petty fraud into criminal conspiracy and apparently had no clue that surveilling a veteran's property was about as intelligent as poking a sleeping rattlesnake with a stick. Time to show her what real consequences looked like. That night, sleep eluded me completely. Something about Patricia's operation felt larger than simple neighborhood harassment. In 18 years of special operations, I'd learned to trust my instincts when they whispered that I was only seeing the surface of something much deeper. So I did what any competent intelligence operative does when the pieces don't align properly. I went digging deeper. The county records office opened at 8 a.m. sharp. I arrived at 7:45, clutching a thermos of black coffee and wearing my most patient expression. The clerk, a middle-aged African-American woman named Beverly, who'd probably processed every significant property transaction in the county for the past 15 years, greeted me with the warmth of someone who genuinely enjoyed helping people. "What can I help you discover today, honey?" "I need to research any liens or encumbrances filed against properties in the Millbrook Heights area over the past 18 months, I said, sliding my property description across her counter. Beverly's fingers danced across her computer keyboard with concert pianist precision. The screen filled with legal documents, filing numbers, and dates that painted a picture more disturbing than anything I'd encountered in Middle Eastern war zones. "Oh my goodness," Beverly murmured, her eyes widening as she scrolled through the records. "This is highly irregular. There are 31 properties with recent lien filings, all from the same source." My blood went ice cold as she pulled up document after document. Patricia hadn't just been collecting fake fines from neighbors. She'd been filing fraudulent liens against their properties, each lien claiming unpaid HOA assessments, violation penalties, and legal fees ranging from $7,500 to $22,000. But the real gut punch came when Beverly revealed the next layer. These liens are all connected to a company called Heritage Property Solutions. According to these records, they've been purchasing distressed properties at tax sales and foreclosure auctions. I stared at the screen, my military training connecting dots that formed a picture uglier than any terrorist network I'd dismantled. "Beverly, who owns Heritage Property Solutions?" Her fingers clicked through corporate filings, and there it was, Patricia Steinberg, listed under her maiden name, Patricia Hoffman. The company had been registered 8 months ago, right around the time she'd launched her fake HOA campaign. The scope of her operation hit me like incoming artillery. This wasn't random harassment or petty extortion. Patricia had been systematically targeting minority homeowners, filing fraudulent liens to cloud their property titles, then positioning herself to acquire their homes for fractions of market value when they couldn't sell or refinance. Beverly, how many properties has Heritage Property Solutions actually purchased? Let me check the deed transfers. Her face went pale as she scrolled through the records. 4 so far. The Nguyen property on Oak Street sold for $45,000 last month. Market value was listed at $340,000. My hands clenched into fists as I realized what had happened to the Nguyen family, the elderly couple Mrs. Rodriguez mentioned, who'd been so terrorized they'd moved away. They hadn't just moved. They'd been forced to sell their home for a fraction of its value because Patricia's fraudulent liens made it impossible to secure clear title transfer. There's more, Beverly continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. These lien filings show a co-conspirator at Riverside Title Company. Someone named Marcus Webb has been rubber-stamping these fraudulent documents without proper verification. The pieces finally clicked into perfect focus. Patricia wasn't just some neighborhood busybody with delusions of authority. She was operating a sophisticated real estate fraud scheme, specifically targeting minority families, using racially motivated harassment to justify liens that would force people out of their homes. The fake HOA was merely the front operation designed to provide legal-sounding justification for liens that would systematically steal property from families she viewed as undesirable in her neighborhood. I thanked Beverly and walked into the crisp morning air, my mind already shifting into tactical planning mode. This wasn't a job for local law enforcement anymore. This was organized crime, interstate fraud, and conspiracy to commit racially motivated theft on a massive scale. Time to contact some old friends who specialized in dismantling networks of criminals who thought they were too sophisticated to face consequences. Patricia Steinberg was about to discover that when you declare war on an Army Ranger, you better be prepared for the full weight of American justice to come crashing down like a tactical airstrike. That evening, I sat in my kitchen with my secure phone and began making strategically important calls. The taste of strong coffee mixed with the satisfaction of finally understanding my enemy's complete scope of operations. When you've spent 18 years dismantling terrorist networks, you learn that victory isn't just about superior firepower. It's about superior intelligence gathering and coordination with the right allies. My first call went to Sarah Chen, a former military intelligence officer who'd transitioned to the FBI's Civil Rights Task Force. We'd served together in Syria, where she'd tracked terrorist financing networks with the same methodical precision she now used hunting hate crimes and organized discrimination. Damon Williams, you old warrior, her voice crackled through the encrypted connection. Let me guess, you've stumbled into something requiring federal attention. I explained Patricia's operation while pacing my kitchen, the smell of sawdust from my restoration work mixing with the aroma of Mrs. Rodriguez's tamales she'd brought over earlier. Sarah's questions were sharp, professional, and told me everything I needed to know about how seriously the federal government would approach this case. Mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, racially motivated property theft, and organized criminal activity, she summarized after I'd presented all the evidence. Plus, if she's crossing state lines or using interstate commerce for any of this, we can add federal jurisdiction. Send me everything you've documented, Damon. This sounds like a civil rights violation case combined with RICO charges. My second call went to Marcus Rodriguez, a Marine veteran who'd become an investigative journalist for the Washington Post. Marcus had built his career exposing corruption in small communities where criminals assumed they were too isolated to attract serious attention. A fake HOA running racially targeted real estate fraud. Marcus's excitement was audible through the phone. Damon, this is front-page material with national implications. How many victims are we discussing? At least 31 properties affected, 4 minority families already forced from their homes, I replied, reviewing my notes. And that's just what I discovered in one morning at the county records office. While I worked my professional contacts, Mrs. Rodriguez had been busy organizing our neighborhood response. Her living room had transformed into a command center that would have impressed my old intelligence unit. Maps covered her coffee table, victim testimonies were organized in neat folders, and she'd created a timeline of Patricia's activities that belonged in a federal evidence room. Damon, I've been talking to every family Patricia targeted, Mrs. Rodriguez said, adjusting her reading glasses as she reviewed her handwritten notes. The scent of green tea and determination filled her small living room. Mr. Chen documented every interaction, saved every fake notice. The Santos family has receipts for every payment they made. Even the Jackson family's basketball hoop violations are photographed and dated. Carl had transformed his mail route into an intelligence-gathering operation. During his daily rounds, he'd quietly interviewed residents, documented which houses had received fake violation notices, and mapped the geographic pattern of Patricia's targeting strategy. "She's been working systematically," Carl explained, spreading a hand-drawn map across Mrs. Rodriguez's dining table. "Started with elderly minorities living alone, then moved to newcomers who didn't know neighborhood history. Classic predator behavior. Isolate the vulnerable first." Deputy Johnson provided crucial law enforcement perspective during an unofficial visit to my workshop. The smell of WD-40 and metal shavings filled the air as I organized evidence files on my workbench. "Damon, I can't get directly involved in the investigation, but I can tell you that federal agents asking questions carries significantly more weight than local complaints," he said, keeping his voice low. "If your FBI contact opens a case, every law enforcement agency in Virginia will suddenly become very cooperative very quickly." The breakthrough came when Marcus's journalistic investigation uncovered Patricia's criminal history. She'd operated similar scams in North Carolina and Tennessee before relocating to Virginia, always targeting small communities with significant minority populations where residents lacked easy access to legal resources. "Charlotte police have an extensive file on her from 2018, Marcus reported during our evening phone call. "Similar operation, different company name. She disappeared when victims started organizing legal resistance." My old Army buddy Michael, who'd become a civil rights attorney, provided the legal strategy that would seal our case. During our video call, he explained the multiple federal crimes Patricia had committed with each fraudulent lien filing. "The beauty of federal civil rights jurisdiction is geographic boundaries become irrelevant," Michael said, his law office visible behind him on screen. "Once the feds establish jurisdiction, they can follow the money trail and criminal pattern anywhere it leads, across multiple states if necessary." By week's end, we had assembled what military strategists call overwhelming force advantage. Federal investigators, professional journalists, documented victims, and local law enforcement all coordinated against a target who still believed she was just dealing with an angry veteran and some frightened neighbors. Time to spring the trap and watch Patricia Steinberg discover that American justice, when properly motivated, moves with the unstoppable momentum of an avalanche. Patricia must have sensed the walls closing in because her next moves reeked of absolute desperation. When predators realize they've been exposed, they don't retreat gracefully. They lash out with the fury of cornered animals, and I'd witnessed this behavior in insurgent leaders who knew their networks were compromised. The pattern never changes. Escalate, intimidate, and burn everything down rather than face accountability. Her first desperate gambit arrived via certified mail on a Tuesday morning. I was replacing damaged porch columns when Carl delivered an envelope thick enough to stop a bullet. Inside was a formal lawsuit claiming I damaged her Lexus during our library confrontation, complete with fabricated witness statements and doctored photographs showing scratches that definitely hadn't existed during our encounter. The smell of fresh legal ink mixed with pure desperation as I read through her amateur legal fiction. According to the complaint, I'd aggressively confronted her in the library parking lot, used racially charged military intimidation tactics, and deliberately keyed her car while making threats about what happens to people who cross Army Rangers. Complete fantasy, but expensive fantasy. She was demanding $25,000 in damages plus attorney fees, clearly hoping I'd settle rather than fight a prolonged legal battle. But Patricia's real desperation revealed itself in her next escalation. 3 days later, Mrs. Rodriguez called me at 5:30 a.m., her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and outrage. "Damon, someone vandalized Mr. Chen's mailbox last night, spray-painted traitor across it in red letters, and there's a note stuffed inside threatening him to keep his mouth shut about neighborhood business." I drove over to find Mr. Chen standing in his driveway, staring at the destruction with the hollow expression of someone who thought he was safe in his own community. The paint was still tacky to touch, and the chemical smell burned my nostrils as I examined the damage. "They came around 1 a.m., he said, his elderly hands trembling as he held the threatening note. "Heard car doors slamming, but by the time I looked outside, they were gone. The note says if I talk to any more reporters or government people, next time it won't just be the mailbox." That same week, the Santos family discovered their tires slashed and "Go back where you came from" scratched into their car's paint. The Jackson family found their children's basketball hoop, the same one Patricia had fined them for, smashed to pieces and scattered across their driveway like broken dreams. But Patricia's biggest mistake was underestimating the network I'd been quietly building. While she was playing amateur intimidation games, Sarah Chen had been conducting a federal investigation that made Watergate look like a parking ticket. Damon, your neighborhood allies have been incredibly productive, Sarah reported during our secure call. We've intercepted communications between Patricia and her associates in 3 states. Turns out this operation extends far beyond real estate fraud. They're also running mortgage scams and identity theft rings targeting minority communities across the Southeast. The intercepted phone calls revealed the scope of Patricia's panic. She'd been pressuring her accomplices to accelerate the timeline and liquidate assets before the investigation expanded. In criminal terminology, that meant she was planning to grab whatever money she could and disappear before federal agents came knocking. Meanwhile, Marcus Rodriguez's investigative journalism had attracted attention from national news outlets. The Washington Post's initial story about small-town racially motivated real estate fraud had gone viral, drawing responses from victims in North Carolina, Tennessee, and Georgia who recognized Patricia's methods. This is evolving into a multi-state hate crime enterprise story, Marcus explained during our coffee meeting at the local diner. The smell of bacon grease and brewing coffee filled the air as he showed me emails from dozens of potential victims. FBI's Joint Task Force on Organized Hate Crimes has assumed control of the investigation. Your neighborhood complaint just became a federal case study. But Patricia's most dangerous escalation occurred when she attempted to bribe her way out of trouble. Deputy Johnson called me Thursday evening, his voice tight with professional anger. Damon, I need to report an attempted bribery incident. Patricia Steinberg approached me this afternoon, offered me $15,000 to lose some paperwork and forget about our conversations regarding her activities. The recording Johnson had made of their encounter was beautiful in its stupidity. Patricia's voice clear as crystal, offering cash payments to a law enforcement officer in exchange for obstruction of justice. She just added federal bribery charges to her growing list of crimes. That night, I sat on my completed wraparound porch, listening to the sounds of my neighborhood settling into evening routines. The smell of someone's barbecue dinner drifted across the cool air, mixed with the scent of Mrs. Rodriguez's jasmine tea from her kitchen window. Tomorrow, Sarah Chen's FBI team would arrive to begin formal interviews and evidence collection. Marcus Rodriguez had his follow-up story scheduled for the weekend edition. And Patricia Steinberg, who'd thought she was smart enough to terrorize minority families without consequences, was about to discover that American justice moves slowly but hits harder than a freight train. By Friday morning, Patricia had reached maximum desperation mode. I was installing new cabinet hardware when my doorbell rang with the aggressive persistence of someone who'd run out of options. Through the peephole, I could see her standing alone on my porch. No Kevin, no Steve, no fake deputies. Just a woman whose criminal empire was crumbling faster than a sandcastle in a hurricane. She'd traded her usual navy blazer for something that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, a designer suit that screamed, "I'm about to flee the country." Her hands shook as she clutched a thick manila envelope, and the smell of expensive perfume couldn't mask the scent of pure panic radiating from her pores. "Mr. Williams," she said when I opened the door, her voice artificially sweet like artificial sweetener, mixed with desperation. "I think we've gotten off on the wrong foot. I'd like to make this right between us." I leaned against my doorframe, keeping my expression neutral. In interrogation training, we'd learned that desperate people reveal more when you let them talk themselves into deeper holes. "Make what right, exactly?" She opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of $100 bills thick enough to choke a horse. $15,000 cash, no strings attached. Just a neighborly gesture to show there are no hard feelings about our misunderstandings. The bills were crisp, new, still smelling like bank teller counters and criminal proceeds. "That's generous of you, Miss Steinberg. What exactly would I be doing to earn this neighborly gesture?" Her left eye developed that nervous twitch again. "Nothing at all. Just maybe you could see your way clear to dropping any complaints you might have filed. Let bygones be bygones. Move forward as friendly neighbors." I pulled out my phone and started recording. "So you're offering me $15,000 to drop criminal complaints against you?" The color drained from her face faster than water from a punctured bucket. "That's not... I never said criminal complaints. I just meant neighborhood disputes and... Ma'am, attempted bribery is a federal crime, especially when it's aimed at obstructing an ongoing FBI investigation." She stumbled backward like I'd slapped her, the cash spilling from her hands and scattering across my porch like confetti at a very expensive, very illegal party. Without another word, she fled to her Lexus and peeled out of my driveway, leaving behind enough evidence to add bribery charges to her already impressive criminal resume. But Patricia's final gambit was her most vicious yet. That afternoon, my phone started buzzing with concerned calls from neighbors. Someone had created fake social media profiles claiming to be military veterans, posting detailed accusations that I was suffering from PTSD, had made racially motivated threats against white families, and was stockpiling weapons while planning some kind of revenge against the community. The posts included doctored photos showing me in military gear, fake quotes about eliminating threats to operational security, and fabricated witness statements from neighbors claiming to fear for their safety. Within hours, the posts had been shared hundreds of times across Facebook and Twitter, painting me as an unstable veteran on the edge of racially motivated violence. Mrs. Rodriguez appeared at my door that evening, her face flushed with anger and a plate of stress-baked cookies in her hands. "Damon, this is absolutely ridiculous. Anyone who knows you would see through this garbage immediately." The smell of her homemade chocolate chip cookies mixed with my growing fury as I scrolled through the fake posts on her tablet. Patricia had crossed every possible line, but attacking my military service while painting me as a racial threat was personal in ways she couldn't comprehend. "She's trying to isolate you," Mrs. Rodriguez continued, settling into my kitchen chair with the determination of someone who'd witnessed enough injustice for one lifetime. "Classic racist tactic. Destroy your credibility before people discover her crimes." But Patricia had made a crucial error. The fake social media campaign included specific details about military operations and classified information that no civilian could have accessed. When Sarah Chen reviewed the posts, her reaction was swift and professionally lethal. Damon, whoever created these posts, had access to information that's only available through military personnel records or intelligence databases, Sarah explained during our secure call. "That means either someone with security clearance is helping her, or she's committed federal crimes accessing classified databases." The digital forensics team traced the fake accounts back to computers in Richmond, linking them directly to the same criminal network that had been running Patricia's real estate fraud scheme. What she'd intended as character assassination had instead provided federal investigators with ironclad evidence of cybercrime, identity theft, and misuse of military records. Marcus Rodriguez's follow-up story ran that weekend with the headline, "Local Real Estate Fraud Expands into Federal Hate Crime Case." The article detailed how a simple neighborhood dispute had uncovered a multi-state criminal organization that had defrauded hundreds of minority families out of millions in property value while using racially motivated harassment to drive them from their homes. "Sunday evening," Sarah called with news that made my coffee taste sweeter than Mrs. Rodriguez's cookies. "Federal arrest warrants have been issued. We're moving tomorrow morning. Hope you're ready for some fireworks, Damon." 18 years of military service had taught me to appreciate the sound of justice incoming, like artillery support arriving exactly when you need it most. Monday morning arrived with the crisp clarity of mountain air and the promise of long-overdue justice. Patricia had called an emergency town hall meeting at the Millbrook Heights Community Center, billing it as a public safety forum regarding dangerous veteran behavior threatening our community values. She'd invited local media, county officials, and anyone who'd listened to her final performance. What she didn't know was that FBI agents Sarah Chen and James Torres had driven down from Richmond the night before, along with Marcus Rodriguez and a camera crew from Channel 12 News. The community center parking lot looked like a law enforcement convention by 9 a.m., with unmarked federal vehicles positioned strategically around the building. Inside, the community center buzzed with tension thick enough to cut with a combat knife. Patricia had positioned herself at the front podium, flanked by Kevin and two new guys who looked like they'd been hired from the Thugs for Rent classified section. She wore her most expensive suit and carried herself with the desperate confidence of someone making their final stand. About 220 residents packed the folding chairs, their conversations creating a low murmur that reminded me of the calm before artillery strikes. Mrs. Rodriguez sat in the front row, her hands folded peacefully but her eyes sharp as laser sights. Carl had positioned himself near the back exit, while Deputy Johnson stood along the sidewall in full uniform, his presence lending official weight to the proceedings. Patricia began her presentation like a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury. She'd prepared a slideshow complete with photos of my house, close-ups of my truck, and dramatic recreations of our various encounters. The smell of nervous sweat and cheap cologne from her hired muscle mixed with the coffee and donuts someone had provided for the gathering. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice artificially steady, "we're here because a dangerous individual has been terrorizing our peaceful community. This man has used his military training to intimidate residents, made racially charged threats against law-abiding families, and created an atmosphere of fear that threatens our property values and our children's safety. She clicked through her slides, each one more ridiculous than the last. Photos of my restoration work labeled as unauthorized construction. Pictures of my lawn with measurements claiming it violated community standards. Even a shot of my American flag, somehow portrayed as evidence of militant behavior. Military veterans suffering from combat trauma and racial resentment can become unpredictable and violent, she continued, warming to her theme like a snake oil salesman hitting his stride. This man has repeatedly referenced his training in killing and his experience hunting human beings. He's turned our neighborhood into a war zone. That's when I stood up from my seat in the middle section. The room went quiet except for the soft whir of news cameras turning in my direction. I walked calmly to the front, my boots clicking on the linoleum floor with the measured pace I'd learned approaching hostile interrogation subjects. "Ma'am, thank you for organizing this gathering," I said, my voice carrying the authority of someone who'd commanded troops in actual war zones. "You're absolutely right that we have a community problem. You are that problem." I pulled out a manila folder thick with documents and approached the podium. Patricia's face went pale as parchment as I spread county records, bank statements, and federal investigation summaries across her presentation table. "Ladies and gentlemen, Patricia Steinberg has been operating a criminal enterprise designed to steal your homes through fraudulent liens and fake HOA violations, specifically targeting minority families. She's already forced 4 families out of their properties, collecting over $280,000 through organized racial discrimination and fraud." The room erupted in angry murmurs as I displayed the evidence. Bank records showing where the fake fine money went. Corporate filings revealing her shell company. Property transfer documents showing how she'd acquired the Nguyen house for a fraction of its value. "She filed 31 fraudulent liens against your properties," I continued, my voice cutting through the chaos. "She's been working with corrupt title company employees to cloud your property ownership, making it impossible for minority families to sell or refinance their homes. Her goal was to force out anyone who didn't fit her vision of neighborhood demographics." That's when Sarah Chen stood up from her seat near the back, her FBI credentials glinting under the fluorescent lights. "Federal Bureau of Investigation," she announced, her voice carrying the authority of the United States government. "We have warrants for the arrest of Patricia Steinberg, Kevin Morrison, and Marcus Webb on charges of mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, bribery, civil rights violations, and racketeering." The next 60 seconds unfolded like a choreographed dance. Federal agents moved from their positions around the room, handcuffs appearing with the precision of military operations. News cameras captured every moment as Patricia's hired thugs melted away like morning mist, leaving her standing alone at the podium, finally stripped of her fake authority. "You have the right to remain silent," Agent Torres announced as he placed handcuffs on Patricia's wrists. The clicking sound echoed through the stunned silence like a gavel falling on her criminal career. The community center erupted in applause that lasted 5 full minutes. Justice, when it finally arrives, sounds like thunder rolling across mountain peaks. 6 months later, I sat on my completed wraparound porch with my morning coffee, watching the sun rise over the Blue Ridge Mountains and listening to the sounds of a neighborhood that had rediscovered peace. The smell of fresh pine from my new deck boards mixed with the aroma of Mrs. Rodriguez's homemade breakfast pastries drifting from her kitchen window. Children's laughter echoed from yards that had once been silent with fear. Patricia Steinberg had been sentenced to 6 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to 23 felony charges, including civil rights violations. The judge had been particularly unimpressed with her attempts to blame everything on misunderstandings and overzealous community involvement. Her final statement in court, claiming she was just trying to maintain property values, earned her an extra year for perjury. Her accomplices received sentences ranging from 2 years to 4 years. Kevin looked like a deflated balloon when they led him away in shackles, while Marcus Webb from the title company lost his license permanently and faced separate state charges. The Richmond muscle she'd hired flipped on bigger fish, leading to a multi-state racketeering investigation that's still making headlines. The financial recovery exceeded everyone's expectations. Federal asset forfeiture laws allowed authorities to seize everything: Patricia's Lexus, her Richmond condo, jewelry, even her precious designer briefcase. Over $420,000 was distributed back to victims with interest and penalties that left most families better off than before they'd encountered their nightmare. The Jackson family received compensation for both their fake fines and their destroyed basketball hoop, then threw a hoop liberation party that became legendary neighborhood lore. Most importantly, the Nguyen family reclaimed their house after federal prosecutors proved their forced sale had been obtained through criminal fraud. Watching them move back into their home, seeing their grandchildren play in the yard again, reminded me why some battles are worth fighting regardless of personal cost. But the real victory was what our community built from the ashes of Patricia's scheme. Mrs. Rodriguez's weekly coffee gatherings evolved into the Millbrook Heights Neighborhood Defense Network, a permanent watch program that protects vulnerable residents from scams and fraud. Carl's Informal Intelligence Network became an official communication system using encrypted group messaging and scheduled check-ins for elderly neighbors. The recovered money from Patricia's criminal enterprise seeded the Millbrook Heights Community Justice Fund, which provides free legal consultation and sponsors our annual Unity Festival. Last month's festival drew over 900 people with food trucks, live music, and educational booths teaching residents about their rights. The sight of families celebrating together in the same community center where Patricia had made her final stand was sweeter than any military victory I'd ever experienced. Deputy Johnson received a commendation and promotion to detective, now running training seminars across Virginia on recognizing racially motivated property fraud. His expertise has helped expose similar schemes in 18 other towns, saving hundreds of families from Patricia's playbook. My kitchen table became an unofficial consultation center for veterans facing civilian legal challenges. Sarah Chen connected me with advocacy groups statewide, and I discovered that protecting fellow service members from predatory scams felt as meaningful as any mission I'd completed overseas. The investigation led to the Steinberg Act, state legislation requiring stricter verification for property liens and HOA claims, while adding enhanced penalties for racially motivated real estate fraud. Marcus Rodriguez's Pulitzer-nominated series on small-town hate crimes exposed the scope of these schemes nationwide, turning our local victory into national reform. On quiet evenings, I receive calls from other veterans facing their own Patricias. The network we built during our federal investigation has become an informal support system spanning multiple states. Last week, a retired Marine from Texas called about fake contractors targeting minority veterans. Next month, I'm helping an Army veteran in Georgia whose neighborhood faces fraudulent code enforcement with obvious racial undertones. Mrs. Rodriguez still delivers cookies weekly, now accompanied by updates on her volunteer work teaching fraud recognition at community centers across 3 counties. Knowledge defeats racism better than any weapon, she says, settling into my kitchen chair with the satisfaction of someone who's helped save an entire community. The sound of children playing safely, neighbors helping neighbors regardless of background, and justice served reminds me daily that sometimes the most important battles happen right in your own backyard. Drop a comment sharing your worst HOA or neighborhood discrimination story right here on HOA Stories. You'd be amazed how common these situations are, especially in communities where people think they can get away with targeting minorities. Subscribe to HOA Stories and hit that notification bell, because next week I'm sharing how a retired teacher exposed a fake charity that specifically targeted elderly black veterans, stealing $300,000 from hurricane victims and the FBI sting operation that brought them down. That's all for today's HOA Madness. If watching justice serve itself made your day, smash that like button, share your thoughts down below, and make sure you're subscribed. More outrageous neighborhood showdowns are just around the corner.